Okay, so then in terms of what you do for intervention, it's important, again, to look at the musculoskeletal system and be protecting that over time, to look at strengthening and or optimizing movement, which is what we'll really talk about in a minute, cardiopulmonary care and monitoring, you already heard about that, and maximizing function. Okay, so you don't have to pay attention to any of this except the blue. And this really is more for the younger people, which they're, who have the late onset, but it happens, they get it before they're full grown. So the important thing to know is that muscles get tight or short because gentle forces applied to the musculoskeletal system over time are very powerful in either creating a deformity or a contraction or in correcting one. So, and so physical therapists are, this is all ingrained in our training. So, so just know that if you have gotten tight somewhere in a muscle, if you very slowly and persistently try to stretch it out, that'll be way more effective than trying to do something suddenly. So anyway, gentle forces applied persistently over time can either produce a contracture or deformity or can correct it. Okay, so if you do have any issues with these things, then stretching and using all of these things to get yourself flexible are the important things. And again, the bottom line is the number of hours per day that a person is in a certain position is what influences whether or not you develop a contraction or deformity. And so that can be sometimes more important if you are spending more of the day either sitting or driving, then it's important to look at that and what impact could that have on you staying flexible. And so I'm a great believer in shooting for I want everyone to have, if they're driving a chair, I like to have ones that let you stand up, that let you lie down. So a lot of times you can, the newer ones that are out, you can drive something and then through the joystick you can stretch yourself out, stand yourself up, move yourself around. And I think that can be helpful because again, it's a number of hours per day. Okay. So knowing that, these are structures that, and this is all in the articles that are already out there, so I'm not going to belabor it too much. You can look this up and have this as a resource, but these are the different things that are at risk for getting tight if you're not moving a lot. And so it's good to preventatively stretch. So if you talk to any great athlete who, as part of their exercise program, it would always have a component of flexibility and warm-up. And so I think it's important for anyone to do that to keep themselves in good shape. And so these are classic things that are good to keep flexible. Well, like you were saying, the range of motion of the chest wall, right? And so of everything else too. Okay, this is for children. I wasn't sure how many really young people there were going to be with later onset, so these are my rules for kids, which is that you stretch early and you stretch preventatively. So if you know that somebody's always in a certain position and that puts them at risk for getting tight in a certain muscle, and that's going to make it harder to move, you stretch in advance. You start stretching preventatively. But you have to be careful, especially if somebody has osteopenia or osteoporosis, because the bones can be more fragile. So we as physios have to be careful in our stretching and be gentle, which is better with kids anyway. And that at the bottom should say, let the child be in charge of the stretch. So for me, if you have somebody helping you stretch, to me, if somebody was stretching my leg, for example, and I told them to stop and they didn't stop, that seems rather abusive to me. So I think even with little kids, you get them training early to where they tell you, no, that's too much, and then you stop, and then you stretch. They tell you when you can stretch them a little bit more. And with children, if you start young, they get to be the experts on stretching, and they'll say, no, I think you need to stretch that muscle a little more, and I always listen to what they tell me. So they're usually right. Okay, so with adults, it can be less complicated because if you have reached, the closer you've gotten to your full growth before you experience any weakness, the more safe your muscles and your bones are that they sort of formed normally, up until then. So that's kind of a safety thing. So that's good. Makes life a little bit easier. The younger you are, the more it could have affected your bones along the way. So that's one thing. With adults, if you're going to start stretching, you have to consider the second paragraph, which is that just because somebody has Pompe doesn't mean they couldn't have also developed arthritis somewhere. So you have to, pay attention to other things that might be going on in your body. And there's a need to balance flexibility with stability. So if you, if you are relying on being a little bit stiff in one muscle group because it helps you stand up and keep your back straight, you don't necessarily want to stretch that out too much because then you'll be a little too flexible. So the bottom line for stretching is to remember that it's based on hours per day in a certain position, and there's some balance you should achieve between stretching out enough that you can move as easily as possible and not stretching out too much so you're too loose. Does that seem like useful information, I hope? Okay, people can use splints for different things, for their feet, for assisting with walking, for staying stretched out. Oftentimes, wearing splints on your feet is not that helpful during walking because, again, people are using different compensations that work by leaning, and if you mess with that, it can make it too hard to walk. So, but I will try sometimes with people.